Olá, sejam
Hello, welcome
muito bem-vindos ao segundo
to
dia
the second
do Fórum
night
Mundial Espírito e
of the
Ciência
LGW's Spirit and Science World Forum 2022 edition. We are here together again to continue our discussions and reflections about such an important topic, and we are happy to have you here watching the forum with us. And that's why we begin this forum dedicating to your heart this greeting of peace and goodwill that has been said by us since the beginning of our movement. God is present and Jesus lives in our hearts forever. It's an honor to continue watching renowned experts in science and religion to talk about such an urgent topic, peace, culture of peace. And here we highlight this edition that we came back to the headquarters of the LGW's Spirit and Science World Forum, which was created by journalist and president of the Legion of Goodwill. And we are here in the noble hall of the Ecumenical Parliament of the World Parliament of Ecumenical Fraternity, the LGW's Parliament, next to the Temple of Goodwill. And this ecumenical moment invites us during this time when we listen to the song by composer Paiva Neto, Prayer for Tranquility, so we can have this moment of silence, this moment of peace in our life, in our heart, for the peace of the world.
Nosso agradecimento a todos
Our
que
gratitude
elevaram
goes
seus
to
melhores
everyone
sentimentos
who
e
elevated their best
pensamentos
thoughts
neste instante de
in this
silêncio,
moment of
neste
silence,
momento de
in this
espiritualidade
moment of
ecumênica.
ecumenical
Inclusive,
spirituality
com o nosso
that has
debate,
everything
com o
to
nosso
do with
tema
our
deste
debate
ano,
here, with our
essa edição
topic,
que acontece
this
online
edition
e
that
tem
takes place
tradução para
online
o inglês,
and is
o
being
espanhol
translated
e
into
também para a
English,
língua
Spanish, and the
brasileira de
Brazilian Sign
sinais,
Languages.
Libras. Então, a gente agradece a todos que já estão na
Thank
audiência,
you
participando
for
pelo
watching
chat,
the forum
lembrando,
and
inclusive, que
participating in the
durante as nossas
chat.
palestras,
And throughout
você
our
poderá
talks,
fazer perguntas,
you can
interagir, trazer
ask
suas
your
opiniões,
questions, you can
porque esse
interact,
é um
bring your
espaço de
opinions,
diálogo,
because
de
this is a
aprendizado
space for
permanente,
dialogues, for
criado pelo
permanent
jornalista
lessons
Paiva
created by
Neto, no Fórum
journalist
Mundial
Paiva
Espírito e
Neto,
Ciência, que existe
the
desde o ano
LGW's
2000.
Spirit and Science
Inclusive, ó, tem
World
aqui
Forum,
na minha frente.
which
Vamos
was
fazer
created in
uma batalha de
2000.
voz. A gente diz assim,
And now we're
ó,
going to send our
Nossa
shout
Ângela
outs to
Souza,
everybody, to
Marta
all
Moura,
those that are
Renato
following
Santos, Sandra
here in
Cancelo
Brazil
Gomes
and
do
in
Rio.
other
Tem uma
countries.
participação de Portugal, Maria Helena
We have a
Monteiro,
participation from
Marissa
Portugal,
Araújo, Florianópolis, Santa Catarina, aqui de Brasília, Lúcio
all the
Oliveira,
regions
João
here in
Lima,
Brazil,
Uberlândia, Minas Gerais, na sintonia, Adriana Ferreira, acompanhando também, que alegria, pelo segundo dia aqui, Derli Francisco,
everybody
do Brasil,
watching
também,
online
mais
here
uma
on
vez, Abel
YouTube.
Marcondes, continue aí registrando.
And then you can also register your participation here on our YouTube channel. And now we want to welcome the coordinator and responsible for the LGW's Spirit and Science World Forum. Josué, it's the second day of the event, and we want to thank the participants here watching in Brazil and across the world. God is present, Jesus lives in our hearts forever. It's an honor to be here in the second night of the forum, the LGW's Spirit and Science World Forum, bringing this topic, Science and Faith for a Culture of Peace. You that are participating today, that was not able to participate yesterday, you have the link here on our channel, spiritandscienceforum.org, with the 3 talks that we had yesterday with Professor Bernard Lightman, talking about an overview, history of religion and science, João Carlos de Carvalho representing the religion of God, of the Christ and of the Holy Spirit, and concluding the day, we had a talk by Dr. Fátima Machado from USP. And we have also an honor to receive today the participation of Dr. Harold Koenig, talking about spirituality, health, and science, and the research and overview of these studies. He's a reference in these studies that correlates spirituality and science. We will all have the opportunity to ask our questions because he will be connected live. And then we will have the talk by KéKeré do Gantois, Mother Ângela Maria Ferreira, and she will bring the participation of the African-derived religions and will reflect on this exchange, this interaction between science and faith. And to conclude the night, we'll have the participation from Humberto Schubert Coelho, and he's a professor from the Federal University of Juiz de Fora, a professor of philosophy, and he will bring the philosophical and scientific investigations on the spiritual phenomena. And we want to thank you that are connected, our friends, speakers, the participants, throughout these 2 days that have dedicated their time to the Legion of Goodwill, to this solidary platform, which is the World Parliament of Ecumenical Fraternity, which is the headquarters of the LGW's Spirit and Science World Forum, which was created by President of the Legion of Goodwill, José de Pavaneto, that was created in December 25th, 1994. And we want to dedicate these words by the creator of the forum about the role of the forum. The World Parliament of Ecumenical Fraternity's doors are always open to all beings of goodwill. It proposes the universal reconciliation of all spiritual and human knowledge in a powerful force at the service of the people. Discord, radicalism, hostilities of all types must remain distant from religious, philosophical, political, scientific, economic, artistic, sporting, and all other debates and propositions, because human beings are born on earth to live in society, a solidary, altruistic, and ecumenical society. And to conclude here, we had the honor to have the open doors, that everybody that is spread the news, our public relations here at the Legion of Goodwill made it possible that this event reached so many people, so many partners, hundreds of publications and divulgations at the academy, the religious community, and I want to highlight some contributions that generously contributed to divulging this forum. Jornal Diário de Notícias de São Paulo, other journals, 8 journals here from São Paulo, and also from Rio de Janeiro, Brasília, websites, newspapers from Paraíba, also in the interior region of São Paulo, in Rio Grande do Sul, in Salvador, Bahia, websites from Pernambuco, and other digital influencers that also spread the news about this forum. Of course, we are bringing just a little bit of our participation here, but there were so many other partners that spread the news about this event, dealing with such an important topic that the forum proposes. So thank you very much for all the partners, all the speakers, especially you that is watching the forum, the LGW's Spirit and Science World Forum. We hope you have a great forum tonight. Thank you very much, Josué. You come back later for the Q&A moment with Dr. Harold Koenig. Now, let's present to you the first talk that we're going to have tonight in the second day of the event. We're going to listen to the words of Harold Koenig, a prize-winning psychiatrist, professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences, and associate professor of medicine at Duke University Medical Center in North Carolina, USA. He's one of the most renowned researchers into the relationship between spirituality and health, and he'll be talking about spirituality, science, and health, an overview.
Hello, I'm Dr. Harold Koenig, and I'm very excited to talk to you all about the topic of spirituality and health. In terms of an overview of what I'll be talking about today, first of all, I will be examining research on religion and mental health, then present a theoretical model that helps to explain how religious involvement influences mental health. Then I will review research on the relationship between religious involvement and physical health and explain the physical health effects of religion, and then finally provide you all with some further resources where you can learn more about this topic. So now I'll talk a little bit about research on religion, spirituality, and mental health. This research is largely contained in the Handbook of Religion and Health. There are actually 2 editions of the handbook, and a 3rd edition will be coming out in December of this year. And this contains a lot of the research that I'll be discussing. Also, a book has been published in 2018 that reviews a lot of the research on mental health in particular, and then several articles that I've written for the British Journal of Psychiatry Advances that examine the latest developments in research and in clinical applications. Let's start out with depression. Depression is one of the common emotions in the world, especially among people who have physical health problems. Of the studies that have looked at the relationship between religiosity and depression, there were 444 quantitative studies that were included in the 2nd edition of the handbook that was published in 2012. And of those 444 studies, 61% found that religious people experienced less depression, recovered more quickly from depression, and religious interventions used to treat depression were effective. 44 studies, 6% reported that those who are more religious were experiencing more depression, although those studies were largely cross-sectional and they were in particular populations where you might expect a positive relationship between depression and religious involvement. Here's a more recent study from the Harvard School of Public Health. This involves 10,000 young people, average age of 23, and what they are looking at is the risk of developing a depressive disorder during an up to 6-year period where these young people were followed. You can see here that the risk of developing a depressive disorder among those attending religious services at least once a week was about a little more than 30% lower among that group compared to those who never attended religious services. So this was a powerful study, a large sample, published in a very reputable international journal of epidemiology, showing that religious attendance in particular helped to prevent the development of depressive disorder in these young individuals. Now, related to depression, of course, is the most feared consequence of depression, which is suicide. The 2nd edition of the handbook indicated that of the 141 studies that had examined this relationship, 75% of those studies found that religious people have fewer suicidal thoughts, are less likely to make suicide attempts, and are less likely to die from suicide. Now, most of the research since that review in 2012 have reported the same findings. And so I'll show you a couple of those studies. This is a study of a random sample of over 20,000 Americans who were followed for 18 years, and they looked at the risk for completed suicide. What they found was that after controlling for gender, age, size of the household, previous suicide attempts, and drug use, they found a 94% reduction in risk of actually completing suicide among those who attended religious services 2 times per month or more often, compared to those who attended less than twice a month. Here's a study out of the Nurses' Health Study. This is a group of 90,000 women who have been followed for approximately 14 years in this study, and they're looking at the likelihood of dying from suicide among these 90,000 women. This is another study out of the Harvard School of Public Health, finding that the rate of suicide among those attending religious services at least once a week or more was only 1/7 the rate of those who never attended. In other words, those women who never attended religious services were 7 times more likely to commit suicide compared to those who attended at least once a week. Now, even after controlling for multiple risk factors for suicide, these researchers found an 84% reduction in risk of completed suicide. Again, Harvard School of Public Health. Here is yet another study that has been published out of the Harvard School of Public Health, looking at the risk of dying from a death of despair. A death of despair is a death that from alcohol use, drug use, or suicide. And in this particular study, they followed 66,000 women over 16 years, and they found that there was almost a 70% reduction in risk of completing suicide among those attending religious services at least once a week. So these are women health professionals. These were all nurses that they followed for those 16 years. Now, they also reported on male health professionals, in particular dentists, pharmacists, optometrists, podiatrists, veterinarians, and so forth. They didn't include physicians in this particular study, but they also found a nearly 50% reduction in risk of dying from a death of despair among those attending religious services at least once a week or more. And what's important in this study is that in both women and in men, they found a P for trend, which was highly statistically significant, which helps to actually determine whether or not this relationship is a causal relationship. The P for trend suggests that indeed religious attendance is causing a lower rate of dying from death of despair in both men and women health professionals. Not surprisingly, similar findings have been reported in for alcohol use, abuse, and dependence, where between 80 and 90% of studies have found that religious people are just less likely to use alcohol, to abuse it, or to become dependent on alcohol. And of the better designed studies, the larger samples, 90% reported that finding. Similarly, for illicit drug use and abuse, between 80 and 90% of studies show that religious people are just less likely to use drugs, abuse them, or become dependent on those drugs. And in fact, almost all of the randomized controlled trials or experimental studies found that religious or spiritual interventions lowered illicit drug use. Now, in terms of anxiety and PTSD, of the 299 studies that we identified in our systematic review, about half found that religious people experienced less anxiety, and of those 299 studies, about a little more than 10% found more anxiety among those who are more religious. The issue with the studies finding more anxiety, however, is that most of those were cross-sectional, which means we really couldn't determine whether or not it was the religion causing the anxiety or whether it was the anxiety causing people to turn to religion for comfort. And in most of those cases, since religion is a very powerful coping behavior, especially when people get anxious or fearful, it's very likely that those positive associations in those 11% of studies were due to the turning to religion caused by the anxiety or fear. And this is also reinforced by the fact that of the 40 experimental studies or clinical trials, 3/4 found that spiritual or religious interventions reduced anxiety symptoms. Here's a study that we did among veterans in the United States. It's a study of over 3,000 veterans, a random sample. It's part of the National Health and Resilience in Veterans Study. We found that lifetime PTSD was lower by more than 50%, that major depression was lower by 50%, and alcohol use disorder was lower by a third, and in terms of current post-traumatic stress disorder, it was lower by 70%, and for current alcohol use disorder, it was lower by more than 70%. Now, this time, religious involvement was assessed by the 5-item religion index, and those who were scoring in the upper half of that scale were compared to those scoring in the lower half, and those who reported higher religiosity were clearly at lower risk for both current and lifetime PTSD as well as alcohol use disorder. Now, what about the positive aspects of mental health? I've been talking about the role that religion plays in helping to prevent the development of psychiatric disorders. Well, let's now look at the positive effects of religious involvement. Of the 326 studies that were identified in the second edition of the handbook, that was published by Oxford University Press in 2012, 326 studies were identified, and of those, nearly 80% found that religious people, those who are more religiously involved and who indicate that religion is important to them, that they experience greater well-being, greater life satisfaction, more happiness, and more positive emotions in general. And of the best studies, even a higher percentage, 82%, found that religious people are simply happier. And what's interesting in this review was that only 3 of 326 studies found that religious people were less happy. So the overwhelming number of studies found that religious people experience more positive emotions. And this also includes more meaning and purpose in life in over 90% of the studies. Greater hope in 3/4 of the studies, and more than 80% finding greater optimism in terms of looking into the future with a more positive and optimistic attitude. Social support is also higher among those who are more religious in more than 80% of the 74 studies that looked at this relationship, again, prior to 2012. Also, delinquency and crime appears to be lower in close to 80% of studies, finding that religious people, not surprisingly, are less likely to be involved in delinquent or criminal activity. Marital stability and satisfaction are also higher among those who are more religious. Those who are religiously involved experience greater marital stability, less divorce, greater satisfaction with the marriage, less spousal abuse, less cheating on spouse, and more likely to have a family with two parents in the home in between 80 and 90% of the existing research. Here's another study out of the Harvard School of Public Health, the top public health journal, public health school in the world, being at Harvard, the T.H. Chan Harvard School of Public Health. They followed 66,000 initially married women for a period of 14 years, looking at who got divorced or separated, finding that among those attending religious services once a week or more, there was a nearly 50% reduction in risk of divorce or separation. So religious involvement does indeed appear to make a real difference in terms of marital stability and marital happiness. Now, here's a model that helps to explain how religious involvement, attending religious services, praying, studying the religious scriptures, volunteering for religious reasons, religious devotion, religious coping, how it affects a person's health, mental health, and social health across their lifespan, from literally the prenatal environment all the way until later life and old age, enhancing many different aspects that influence mental and social health. This is out of the Handbook of Religion and Health that I told you about earlier, the third edition, the one coming out in December of this year. Let's look now at physical health. Health behaviors. Religious people simply live healthier lives. They are more likely to exercise. They're less likely to engage in extramarital sex and risky sexual activities that increase a risk of venereal diseases, of sexually transmitted diseases like HIV or some of these other sexually transmitted diseases, such as the human papillomavirus that causes cervical cancer. So religious people, for that reason, are less likely to develop these diseases. The only problem with religious people's health behaviors is that they eat too much. They really enjoy eating food. And even though that they eat a healthier diet in general, they tend to be heavier. They tend to be heavier than those who are less religious or non-believers entirely. So, there's some work there that needs to be done in terms of controlling one's appetite and one's weight. Now, here's another health behavior that we know is not good for health, and that is cigarette smoking. So there were 135 studies that we identified in our systematic review in the 2012 edition of the handbook. And of those 135 studies, 90% found that religious people are significantly less likely to smoke cigarettes. Now, that is going to have a consequence in terms of many different physical health conditions. That means religious people are less likely to have high blood pressure. They're less likely to have chronic lung disease. They're less likely to develop lung cancer. They're less likely to develop heart disease, all because they are not smoking cigarettes as much as other people are. Now let's look at the direct relationship between religious involvement and physical health. We'll start out with immune and endocrine functions. We know that the immune system is of critical importance in enabling people to maintain their health, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic that we're undergoing here. But religious people have stronger immune systems. So in more than half of the studies, that's what they found, that religious people have stronger immune systems. They also are less likely to have stress hormones circulating in their blood. And stress hormones cause all sorts of problems. Cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine cause all sorts of problems in the body. They increase our risk of cancer. They affect our memory and our ability to retain retain our cognitive functioning, and they create havoc on the cardiovascular system, these stress hormones. But religious people, in 3/4 of the studies, are less likely to have circulating, high levels of circulating stress hormones. Now, that's not surprising, because religious involvement is such a powerful coping behavior. It reduces the stress level and the physiological consequences of stress. Cardiovascular functions, not surprisingly, then, are better among those who are more religious. There's lower blood pressure in almost 60% of studies, better cardiovascular functions in general, greater or lower cardiovascular reactivity, higher heart rate variability, and lower levels of C-reactive protein, all of which are good for your cardiovascular system. And in terms of coronary heart disease in general, 63%, nearly 2/3 of studies, show that religious individuals have significantly lower rates of coronary heart disease and are less likely to die from those disorders. Here's a recent study, again from the Harvard School of Public Health. This was published in the world's top epidemiology journal, the American Journal of Epidemiology. This was a 12-year prospective study where they followed 44,000 women who had no high blood pressure at the start of the study, and they followed them for those 12 years, and they identified those that then developed hypertension. And what they found was that, once again, women attending religious services at least once a week have significantly lower likelihood of developing high blood pressure in this particular study. And this is after taking into account 25 different sociodemographic, psychological, and physical health predictors of hypertension. So even after controlling for all of those factors, you're still seeing a reduced likelihood of developing high blood pressure or hypertension among women who are attending services more often. Now, that also reflects then the death rate from stroke and cerebrovascular disease. You can see here that among those attending religious services to any degree have anywhere between 1/3 and 1/4 lower risk of dying from a stroke or from cerebrovascular disease. Again, this is out of the Harvard School of Public Health, published in JAMA Internal Medicine, a 16-year study where 75,000 nurses were followed, over time, and their death rates from various illnesses identified. Now, what about all-cause mortality? All-cause mortality is a good indicator of the cumulative effect of attitudes and behaviors. And what the research showed back in 2012 was that 68%, more than 2/3 of studies, found that religious people simply live longer than people who are not religious or not as religious. So there is apparently about a 7 to 14-year difference in longevity among those attending religious services regularly compared to those who don't attend religious services. Here is that study from the Harvard School of Public Health looking at different causes of mortality over time among these 75,000 women followed for 16 years. It was published in JAMA Internal Medicine. All-cause mortality was about 1/3 less among those regularly attending services. And death rates from cardiovascular disease, from heart disease, was also lower by about 25%. And death rates from cancer were also lower by a little more than 20% in terms among those attending religious services regularly. Here is a study among young people. This is 10,000 young people, again from the Harvard School of Public Health, reported in a major epidemiological journal. These are 10,000 young people followed for up to 6 years, average age of 23. Here we see a 2/3 reduction in risk of developing cancer. So these are young people. It appears that religious involvement reduces the risk of developing cancer over time in this group. Here's a model that helps to explain how religious involvement influences a person's physical health and longevity. So the source of these benefits, now this is a monotheistic Western model that includes Christians, Muslims, and Jews. We also have models for people from the Eastern traditions as well. But for Western traditions, the belief in and attachment to God seems to be the source of these benefits. And that attachment to God involves the theological virtues of faith in God, hope in God, and love of God. When that is present, it appears that people then consequently experience better health across the board. Now that belief in and attachment to God is nourished within the religious community and is affected by peer influences, as well as by influences within the person's home where they grew up. That then is reflected in terms of religious practices, public religious practices, private practices such as prayer and scripture reading, religious commitments, religious experiences, and religious coping. All of these religious expressions then influence daily decisions, affect health behaviors, and influence health and activities, as well as compliance with medications and various treatments. They also enhance the human virtues of forgiveness, honesty, self-discipline, altruism, generosity, humility, gratefulness, patience, and dependability. All of them influence the person's social connections and also affect their positive emotions. It generates purpose and meaning in life, hope, optimism, well-being, and happiness. And it also helps to neutralize the negative emotions of depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. All of these factors then influence the nervous system, the immune and endocrine systems, and cardiovascular functions, ultimately affecting physical health and longevity. Now, bear in mind that all of these pathways are influenced by genetic factors and also by developmental experiences that the person had during childhood. But overall, everything else being equal, it appears that this connection with God influences health across the board and ultimately influences longevity. So in conclusion, religious involvement is related to better mental, social, and behavioral health and improves these aspects of health over time based on research published by the best public health journals in the world, the best public health institutions, universities in the world, and published in the best journals in the world. So religious involvement is also related to better physical health and greater longevity. These findings have huge implications for public health and healthcare costs. And clinical applications of this research are vast in terms of providing mental and physical health care as well. So thank you very much. Here are some further resources. We have an e-newsletter that comes out every month, and it's free. All you have to do is sign up for it. We have a research workshop that trains people how to do research. We've had many people from Brazil come to this workshop and really from all over the world. So, I hope to see you in Durham, North Carolina someday at our research workshop. And then finally, here's our website. We have a lot of free information here that can be very useful to anyone interested in this connection between religious faith and health.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harold Koenig, for your contribution here in our Spirit and Science World Forum. Dr. Harold Koenig is a prize-winning psychiatrist, professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences, and associate professor of medicine at Duke University Medical Center in North Carolina, USA. He is one of the most renowned researchers into the relationship between spirituality and health. His topic today was Spirituality, Science, and Health, an overview. I would like to say hello to Dr. Harold Koenig, who is live with us right now, and everybody in our chat can ask questions for Dr. Harold Koenig. Dr. Harold Koenig, thank you very much for being here with us today.
To interact with your audience, and I look forward to any questions that people have.
Great, Dr. Koenig. First of all, I would like to ask you about these researches that you presented here today, if there is a specific tradition that is looked at, or is religiosity and spirituality in a general view, whichever religion is also corresponded here in these researches that you presented today?
Well, most of the research that is focusing in on populations that are Christian. So I would say 80 to 90% of these studies are in Christian populations. And that's mainly because those are the populations that have money that can support research. And since the majority of Westerners happen to be of a Christian affiliation, we know that these findings apply to people from that tradition. However, there is also research that's been conducted in other religious traditions, including Judaism and Islam, as well as Hinduism and Buddhism, that seem to show that devout faith in any of those religious traditions correlated with better health. Now, as I said, most of the research we have is in Christian populations, and to the population, that is the religious faith that we can primarily apply these findings to, because you can only apply the funds that the studies were done in, and that just happens to be the case mainly because of research funding reasons.
Great, Dr. Koenig. We are going to ask you the questions that are here in our chat. The first one is, what spiritual interventions can reduce drug use, as mentioned by Dr. Koenig?
Well, one of the most common and widespread spiritual interventions is the 12-step program. The 12-step program are known as Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and there are 12 programs in virtually every addiction, from food addictions to pornography addictions to all sorts of nicotine addictions, caffeine addictions, and of course alcohol and cocaine and the hard drugs like heroin and opiates. So those self programs that people get together by themselves, they don't typically involve professionals, but they go about together as a group, applying the 12 steps, 8 of which are distinctively religious in nature, or you can say spiritual in nature. But 8 of the 12 steps really have to do with God, with surrendering the problem to God, and to then helping out other people, loving your neighbor in a way that not only helps you, but also helps those around you with similar problems.
Dr. Koenig, because of the benefits that you presented of spirituality to health in your researches and so many papers that you quoted, the question is asking the following thing. How could doctors work religiosity or spirituality with their patients?
Okay, an excellent question. So how do you apply all of this research that you've seen to clinical practice. And so there is one activity that is uniformly agreed upon by virtually all of the major mental health organizations in the world. And that has to do with taking a spiritual history. So taking a spiritual history on every patient. What does a spiritual history involve? Well, it involves asking patients about, are they a member of a religious faith tradition or a spiritual tradition? And do they find that that is a source of comfort, or sometimes it can be a source of stress for people? So asking them about their faith tradition in terms of both its potential benefits in terms of a resource and in terms of a factor that might be generating some emotional or even physical health problems. Also, one would like to know whether or not the person is a member of a supportive faith community. Are they a member of a church, a synagogue, or mosque? And is that supportive to them? Next, you'll want to know whether or not religion conflict with medical care, with the kinds of treatment the doctor or the psychiatrist or the mental health professional might want to administer, such as medication or different kinds of psychotherapy. Next, you'd like to know whether or not there are any spiritual needs that are present that might be influencing the person's mental or physical health. And so that is kind of a brief history, spiritual history, that both medical, nursing, and mental health professionals can administer. And I also have a 15-item, more comprehensive mental health spiritual history that goes more deeply into the person's background in terms of their religion that they grew up in, and whether or not that was a good experience for them or a negative experience, whether or not they've changed religious faiths since they were children, and why did they do so? Have they had any spiritual or religious experiences that were particularly positive in their life, or that might have been particularly negative? How much are they involved in their faith tradition currently? And if not, why not? And then going more deeply into either positive or negative experiences that may have affected their faith and has influenced how active they are currently. So those would be that would be one of the most common and agreed upon interventions that could be used. Now, also, patients may want to pray with the healthcare professional. Now, that may be a little bit more controversial, but if the patient wants the healthcare professional to pray with them, I don't see a problem with that if the healthcare professional is to do it. Now, if the healthcare professional is nervous about doing that, they can simply ask the patient to say the prayer and then to agree with the patient at the end, saying an amen, which simply means let it be so. So that is what I would encourage. Now, one should always show respect for the patient's faith tradition and be sure that whatever interventions are done, they are person-centered. So getting the patient's, history, spiritual history, and then considering supporting the religious and spiritual beliefs of the patient, or even if for a mental health care professional, administering a form of religiously or spiritually integrated psychotherapy. And if any of you are interested in those kinds of therapies, we have manuals and patient workbooks that are available for free on our website. Just go to our Duke University Spirituality, Theology, and Health website and go to the Religious CBT tab. And it provides workbooks in all different faith traditions that you can utilize, from Christianity to Islam to Hinduism to Buddhism, Judaism, and Islam. So those are the kinds of treatments that you can do to integrate these findings into clinical practice.
Great, Dr. Koenig. The next question is from Camila Barbieri, and she asks, how do parents' spirituality and religiosity influence the children's relationship with their own faith? Could it be a protective factor?
There is no question that the religious beliefs of parents influence not only the mental health of children, but actually their physical health as well. And that actually, surprisingly, begins prior to conception, based on the behavior of the parents in terms of their religious beliefs and practices. Those religious parents are going to be less drugs, use alcohol. They are going to be less stressed out because, you know, they have a powerful coping. They can deal with stress. So they'll be depressed and anxious. Consequently, that will actually affect the quality of the sperm and the ovum. And then once the sperm and ovum come together and they form the fetus, then the behavior of the mother, which will be strongly influenced by their religious beliefs, will then start to take effect. Religious mothers simply don't use alcohol as much, don't use drugs. They're more likely to be married and have a spouse that is supportive at home. And so consequently, they're going to be experiencing less stress. And we know that as the brain develops in the womb, that having lower levels of stress and less exposure to drugs, alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine are going to result in a healthier brain. And then when the child arrives, many religions encourage having large families and really value the appearance of a baby in the family. And now that doesn't mean that non-religious families don't also value the appearance of a baby. The religions, part of the teachings of the religion are to have large families, strong families, and that results in infants feeling more cared for, which enables them to develop a sense of basic trust. And then finally, as the child enters into the teen years and they start developing peer groups and start becoming engaged in various activities, that's when religious parents are more likely to monitor the child. Religious parents want to know, what the child is doing, what the teenager is doing, who the teenager is hanging out with. And if they're possibly drinking or smoking or doing any of these negative health behaviors, they're going to discourage those behaviors, and they are more involved that in a peer group that is more pro in terms of social activities and moral and ethical views. So the religion of the parent has an enormous impact on the mental, social, and physical health of that child later in life.
Professor Koenig, the next question is from Carlos Henrique, and he asks, Dr. Koenig, you presented data that show how experience of religiosity, spirituality, impacts the life of human beings in various aspects. Does the future of a healthy planet go through this experience?
So, just as if you look at the Old Testament or the Jewish Bible, see just exactly how humans tend to faith is concerned, and also what happens when they desert their religious faith. And spirituality tend to blossom, and they become very important within a society usually thrives. And there are also periods when religion becomes less common and spirituality is less central to the lives of people. And those are periods when oftentimes mental values and health behaviors begin to decline. And so there is typically a cycle of increasing beliefs within a society. right now within the United States, and I don't know whether it's happened yet, secularism is to be dominating, society now, and religion has less of an influence. So I am concerned that as this secularization, that we may be facing more health problems, more addictions, and higher costs of health care because people are going to be sick.
Dr. Koenig, the next question is from Daniel Guimarães e Silva, and he asks, in your view, do public health policies today take advantage of the full potential of spirituality and religiosity in promoting health services? How could they look more to this topic?
Public health implications of the relationship between religion, spirituality, and health. So many different implications. We actually, in the 3rd edition of the handbook that I was talking about in the lecture, for health specifically. One of the reasons is Dr. Vanderweel is a professor at the Harvard School of Public Health and is one of the most and so we make those recommendations, and some of those have to do with exposing children to religious and spiritual beliefs earlier in their lives, and also continuing to support religious and spiritual communities more generally in terms of tax deductions and things of that nature, in terms of mobilizing volunteers to help with also in terms of caring for the homeless and helping out in times of natural disaster. There are many different things that governments can do to be more religion friendly that they need to do if they want to reduce loss of health, sure that human flourishing occurs in their country.
And Dr. Koenig, here is our last question. There are many other questions in our chat, but we will go to our last one from Teresa Afonso. She asks, Dr. Koenig, with all these extremely relevant data on spirituality contributing to the well-being of society, what is the role of science so that spirituality is increasingly considered in the areas of human knowledge?
Excellent question. And in fact, I have a 5-day research workshop here at Duke University that is designed specifically to train researchers to do research in this area in terms of real scientific research and to get grants in order to support the research and then to write up the research in mainstream journals. We've had many people from Brazil and other South American countries come to this workshop, and we offer some scholarships as well that cover part of the costs. And so if you are interested, and I'll direct you to our website. Again, it's the same website, the Center for Spirituality, that describes the workshop, and we are in desperate need of well-trained young researchers to get into this area and to do research. That's what these 5 days are designed to do.
Dr. Koenig, I would like to thank you very much in the name of the Legion of Goodwill for accepting our invitation to participate and contribute to the Spirit and Science World Forum today. And I open now for your final remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh, very much for allowing me to talk on this program and for also orchestrating the question and answer period. The questions were excellent, really some of the best questions I think I've been asked in the past. And so I know that your audience is very motivated and interested in this topic. I would just wish them well and encourage them to, if they are healthcare professionals, to integrate this into their practices, and if they are scientists or researchers, to begin doing research in this area and publishing it. So my final word is take care, God bless, and stay safe.
Thank you very much once again to Dr. Harold Koenig, a prize-winning psychiatrist, professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences, and associate professor of medicine at Duke University Medical Center in North Carolina, USA. He is one of the most renowned researchers into the relationship between spirituality and health. Today, his topic was spirituality, science, and health, an overview, and he answered some of the questions that were put here in our chat box. Now, Angelica and Leticia will come back to stage, and we will change the simultaneous translation so that the Portuguese channel can have the original audio and the English channel could have the translation. Thank you once again.
Obrigada também, Josué. E os comentários? Olha, Alexandre Souza de Andrade,
The
muito bom
comments
esse
from
estudo. Maria de
all
Fátima,
of our chats, thanking the studies and grateful for the informations received today. These informations received about spirituality, living, solitude, depression, the chats. The host is thanking all the chats, the messages received, thanking the speech of today, saying how important it is for our daily lives, dealing with such topics of depression, and thanking Dr. Koenig for his wonderful speech today. All very happy with all the content they received. Continue participating and interacting. The questions that were not be able to answer will be sent to Dr. Harold. Your interaction is very important because the question will arrive, we'll interact. Pretty soon, another speech reflecting on this important theme. And we would like to remind you that this forum happens exactly thanks to your support, your incentive that allows that more actions such as this can be developed, and with your financial support as well. When you register, you can give your donation in. There are various amounts you can help. And there's, throughout the whole year, a series of events are also held out, with weekly interviews being made and divulged in the forum's web channel. So your contribution is very important, and it can still be made at spiritandscienceforum.org. If you still haven't registered or given your support, you can still do so, and it'll be very important for this event to reach even further. And so we can continue to listen to specialists, Dr. Harold Koenig, and so many others some are going to be here today. Register and help support this forum. Thank you. Now we were going to watch a video where the children from the Legion of Goodwill schools in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo bring the meaning of peace to them.
What can we do to have peace? For us to have peace, we have to be calm. Meditate, go to church, nobody disturbs us, say goodbye. For us to have peace, we need to pray, we need to go for a walk, we have to be calm. We have to pray to God. We cannot lie. What is peace? For me, peace is fraternity, health, the silence in a classroom, and helping our fellow beings. Peace for me is a unity that you feel love, happiness, and this can also be felt with the hearts when we feel something good. Peace is also when we feel silence, when we feel harmony in the heart. For me, peace is when we do good deeds, is when we have love among people. Peace for me is when we do not have war, when the countries are together and nothing bad happens. In the classroom, we have to have peace, otherwise we're not going to have a good place to coexist.
Very well. Let's listen to our children, wise children, bringing their words, their opinions about what is peace and how to find peace. We heard the children who attend the Legion of Goodwill schools in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. In the schools of the Legion of Goodwill, it's always good to listen to the little ones. So let's continue with the second talk of the night. We will follow KéKeré do Gantois, Mãe Ângela Maria Ferreira, representative of the religious center located in Salvador, Bahia State. She will talk to us about the topic Science and Faith from the perspective of African-derived religions. Good evening. May Orixá Obá bless you all. The channel of the Legion of Goodwill's Spirit and Science World Forum on YouTube brings in 2022 online content about science and faith for a culture of peace. It brings together different representations of religious and philosophical segments in an attempt to provide evidence of the convergence between religious segments and the scientific sphere, taking into consideration the parallels between dogmatism and pragmatism. On this occasion, Gantois thanks for the invitation to take part in the activity arranged by the President of the Legion of Goodwill, Mr. José de Paiva Neto, and the Communication and Institutional Relations team. The reason I am taking part is because I come from an African community tradition, EDT, Iaomim, Axé, Iamassé, better known as the Gantois Religious Center, founded in 1849 by African Nagô Maria Júlia da Conceição Nazaré and her husband, African Jeje Francisco Nazaré Dietra. The Gantois Religious Center is a long-time sacred space for religious expression and a remarkable sanctuary, which maintains millennia-old traditions and legacies of the Yoruba people from Abeokuta. It preserves the worship of the Orishas and follows a matriarchal tradition based on a family structure that preserves parental ties. Its leaders are always female, following criteria of heredity and consanguinity. It is based on the genetic heritage of the Oba Alaketo, which comes specifically from the southwest Nigeria, where Keto traditions used to prevail, but due to the disputes between kingdoms, it was denominated by Oyo. The Gantois Religious Center preserves and perpetuates the memory and cultural tradition of both Bahia and Brazil. That explains why it is designated as an area under cultural and landscape protection by the Salvador's Municipal Law 3590, dated December 16, 1985. It is also protected by IFAM as a Brazilian historical and ethnographic heritage site by Ordinance dated December 17, 2002. At the civil scope, Gantois is regulated by a nonprofit organization called the São Jorge e Belchosse Association, which dates from the foundation of the religious center, which is in the 19th century. It looks after its material and intangible heritage, which includes the Mãe Menininha Memorial and the Mãe Carmen Community Center. Associates are also co-responsible for the institution as well as for looking after the religious aspect. The association was reformulated and adjusted to comply with federal legal requirements in 2002. It holds elections every 2 years and has regular monthly board meetings and extraordinary annual general meetings. It publishes its balance sheet and financial statements reporting at the end of each 2-year period. The entity has a social reach and operates to solve problems that affect the surrounding community, because we believe that the Gantois Religious Center has a fundamental role as a maker of social inclusion policies. On its timeline, the succession chain started Maria Júlia, then came Mãe Pulquéria, Mãe Maria da Glória, Mãe Menininha, and Mãe Cleusa. Since 2002, the center has been led by Iaomim Carmen Oliveira da Silva. My name is Ângela Ferreira, and I was born and raised like everybody in the Candomblé religion. I was initiated into it more than 60 years ago and took over as KéKeré in 1997. Ever since, following Black ancestral and family traditions, I've served as Mãe Pequena do Gantois and worked closely with a religious council that is headed by the Iaomim, who's also my biological mother, and whom I'm representing in this online colloquium. In the civil and material world, I'm a retired professor at the Catholic University of Salvador, where I studied nursing, focusing my career on obstetrics, which is a scientific field of healthcare. I am a Black citizen, a wife and mother of 3 children, and grandmother of 4, a nurse and university professor who has coexisted with both science and KéKeré, the Mãe Pequena of Gantois. I'm also a member of a traditional religion in Bahia, whose history contains the foundation of faith and is a place that cares about living a healthy life. After the invitation I received from the LGW, I'm here to discuss the subject of the LGW's forum, Science and Faith. In the universe of time, which is divided into 3 phases, we historically highlight 3 nuances. In the beginning, in remote times, science and religion walked together, following the example of different experiences and civilizations such as Egypt and similar nations, the Greco-Roman world, and even Latin American peoples. This alliance, after a certain time, led to discoveries in the field of astronomy, genetics, biology, cytology, psychology, and others. Subsequently, with different concepts of society, philosophy, economy, and politics, talking about religion and science seemed virtually paradoxical. Such were the mindsets of that time. So these 2 words began to be understood as dichotomous realities, where the strong position and their incompatibility were always highlighted. On a third moment, in today's secular state, what we see is a reconsideration of these closed and archaic views that eliminate the possibility of any dialogue between the parties. Looking at the world and humanity as an agent of the world's history is what matters now, regardless of the approach we adopt. Many concepts and prejudices have disappeared, showing a paramount need to review the positions according to which there would be a contradiction between the world of science and the world of religiousness, as if one necessarily overrides the other. New evidence shows the benefits of spirituality for the human body and mind, thereby helping science to heal better, as we have seen in examples taken from the field of medicine. Science, religion and reason, faith, matter, and spirituality. These are a double triad of terminologies that transition between people. They are stages and stages of an existence that is experienced and approached in every possible way, in its most diverse instances, including social position and power. By identifying these three different concepts in which we perceive and attempt to understand reality based on material means and on the philosophical, idealistic principles that permeate the human's histories, great transformations, the triad mentioned above can be summarized as an opposition of materialism versus spiritualism.
Theoretical and/or methodological approaches were ways of understanding at a certain degree life in society and determining human consciousness and its organized basis in the world, whether on a dialectical, historical, and materialistic plane with views that would prioritize existence and control based on physical phenomena and material goods, or on the plane of non-physical substantiality that influences matter. The fact is that almost everything that lies between progress and catastrophe in the history of humanity is the result of human action in connection with social change processes that lie on the description of a material, ascetic episodes of how the beliefs are connected with the divine. Over the millennia, characterization by denial only served to make sharper questions, to revise our attitudes toward science, and to observe our feelings, thoughts, and impulses, everything that does not actually limit the concepts, which in turn ended up limiting the meaning of life in the universe. Science and spirituality consist only of guiding parameters for examining reality, opening a series of findings that help us understand that they are connected and much more reconcilable than vain philosophy can ever imagine. Medicine has been an open field for exercising scientific knowledge, because advances in treatment and prevention are evidenced by the research and discoveries of numerous scholars. The greatest example we have today is the COVID-19 pandemic, when scientists raced to develop an efficient vaccine. On the other hand, religiousness and spirituality provided the emotional support needed, a sense of security and well-being, and ensured healing for many communities. The greatest intellectuals of the 21st century, who had an impact on contemporary thinking, both globally and here in Brazil, admit the origin of these complex structures of human nature and how this reflects in how we make sense of the world and the place of its individual in the major arrangement of life on Earth. The idea is for us to broaden our horizons in order to know how to live well. The approach towards healthy living is based on the positive outcomes that spirituality, by deconstructing the historical ambivalence between reason and faith, has provided us. Brazil today has a series of institutions and professionals in the medical scientific field, including university centers, that have chosen to study links and to create spaces for discussions on the subject, with the aim of validating faith as an important vehicle for the physical and mental well-being of individuals. Religious currents encourage human beings to overcome serious problems with provable impacts and evidence about health as a result of the existing community spirit. In religious associations, the collectivity assumes that we are never alone. We undoubtedly need to understand that nothing is limited to one or another religion. The factor is religiousness as a source of spirituality and not in an individual segment of religion. Faith surpasses any label because we understand that the personal pursuit of life and transcendence is our link with the divine plane and with self-knowledge in our relationships with the family, society, and the environment, and the latter also being seen as nature itself. The religions and traditional African religions, allied with the sense of spirituality of those who have that faith and embrace those ancestral traditions of Black origin, which date back millennia in terms of spiritual practices, see and work in the fields of both science and faith, and are able to build healing bridges. In Candomblé specifically, knowledge about the mysteries of nature and the vibrational elements of healing ratifies the communion between science and faith. The oracular tradition, with its divining system, presents a true ethnomathematics, an explicit combination analysis in a kind of philosophical treatise of both physical and metaphysical nature. Its ideograms and symbols deal with meanings. Every affirmation is precise and therefore scientific. And over the millennia, all knowledge has been passed on orally. Word of mouth is the ideological instrument for preserving traditions and ways of life. In African societies, religions and religiousness were the very system of life and culture. In Brazil, the confirmation of Candomblé takes place in the heart of family reorganization, where everyone shares a history and an ancestral memory. The social environment is linked to everything that refers to the creation of the divine, and it appears in nature with it. There's nothing primitive about this, but rather primordial. Advanced science is reconciling with the philosophy of myths. It is the true and natural cultivation of memory without any mechanical or artificial technology, but as a totally humanized technology. The art of memorizing what comes from the mind and its power to expand the reality of the senses, combined with supernatural force, is the true essence of the sacred. In the context of Candomblé, talking about orixás means identifying everything from the immanent place as a place of science to the transcendent plane, which is the territory of faith. Let's see something that is very clear for us who come from the African tradition. Ogum is the father of technology, the one who guarantees the chemical element iron in our organism. Oxum, Iemanjá, e Oxalá are water and air, the ultimate sources of life. What would happen to human beings and their research if science did not offer an ecosystem for discovering medicines? What would happen to communication if Exu did not make information available? And so on and so forth with the other orixás of the African pantheon. Speaking, touching, sharing, feeling, experiencing, the transit between the material and the immaterial, and all the endless rites with initiation, being reborn into a new life, are essentially frameworks for real life. All this is scientific and at the same time sacred within Candomblé. The continuous search for relative truth is narrowed down, and Candomblé has opened up fronts of convergence for society, even though it has suffered black enslavement, intolerance, and religious racism for centuries. For a long time, the view of black African religions was based on evolutionism with fetishist animism and the idea of collective hysteria, but today this has been overcome by many studies and discoveries, including the field of psychoanalysis. Anchored in an active communion and complementarity, religious leaders of African origin use their knowledge for social protection. They are activists of life, for life, and with life. The interface between scientific trading and ancestral tradition already takes place in Candomblé communities, where the illogical rationale is to believe in existence and its mysteries, in the awakening of the homeostasis, and not placating absolute truths when faced by their peers, because the intention is to expand the mind and balance on all levels in order to guarantee the right to a healthy and meaningful life. Adupé, lots of axé for everyone. With a lot of honor and learning so much, we heard the words KéKeré do Gantois, Mother Ângela Maria Ferreira, a representative of the Gantois Religious Center, talking about science and faith from the perspective of African-derived religions. We also thank the Mother Ângela, who is following the live stream today. Because of a health condition, she was not able to participate here to answer to a lot of questions that have come through the YouTube channel chat, and we want to thank you and for your disposal to talk to the audience, being at the disposal of the audience from so many questions that we already had based on the knowledge that we acquired here. And we want to thank the participation representing the Association of São Jorge Belchossi, and she says, thank you for the invitation and congratulations to the Legion of Goodwill for the initiative, and on behalf of the Legion of Goodwill and its president, José de Paiva Neto, Sister Ângela did a salute to the president of the Legion of Goodwill, and we also highlight this ecumenical space, the Parlamundi of the Legion of Goodwill, that is next to the Temple of Goodwill, the ecumenical monument of Brasilia, in the Noble Hall of the TGW. The journalist Paiva Neto made a reference and made a pay a tribute
E também a nossa saudação nesta noite a Yarolixá,
And also
Yarolixá, Mãe
our
Carita,
gratitude
Sem
to Mother who
E
is
nosso
accompanying
agradecimento
us.
também a todos que se manifestaram
And
e
we
que
also thank all the
interagem com a gente no
participation and the
chat, como
interaction
mencionou.
here on the
Todas as
YouTube
dúvidas,
channel.
as perguntas
All the
serão
questions
encaminhadas
will be
à
sent
Ângela,
to
que
Mother
falou tanto,
Ângela,
né, sobre a
who talked
força
so
da
much about the force of
a
the
maneira que o povo de Terreiro
ancestrality
compreende
and how the religious center
pensamento
understands
com a fé,
rationality
a
with faith
religiosidade.
and religiousness.
Trouxe, inclusive, essa relação
She
que
brought
a religião
this
tem, as
relationship
religiões de matriz
between
africana,
African-derived
compromisso,
religions with this
coletivo,
commitment, this
né, com a
collective
comunidade.
commitment
Tudo isso
with
foram
community.
pontos muito importantes
And these
que
are
com certeza
important
despertaram
points
nós reflexões
that called
muito
our
interessantes.
attention
Então,
and
continue
drew
fazendo aí
reflections for
essa
us.
interação. A gente
So
agradece
continue
aqui algumas
interacting with us. We want to
que chegam,
thank
por
some
exemplo,
messages that have come
Mar
through
Teixeira dos Santos, de Lagoa
from
da
a lot of
Bahia,
places here in
trazendo
Brazil.
importantes ensinamentos
And
para a edificação
one of the
da
people said
humanidade e a
so many
propagação do
important
amor
lessons
universal. Este é o
in order
verdadeiro
to
sentido da
propagate the
vida.
love.
Parabéns
This is the
pela
meaning of
Igreja
life.
Viva. O Eduardo
He's from the
Sobrinho
Church
também.
Viva.
Que palestra
Also Eduardo, and he
maravilhosa,
said,
estou
what a
muito
wonderful
feliz
talk.
de
I'm
estar
very happy to
participando
be
do Fórum
participating
da
in the
Beneficência
LGW's
da
Spirit and
EDT.
Science
A
World
Joana
Forum.
Rebouça
Joana
traz aqui
Rebouça
a sua saudação,
also
axé,
brings her
a
greeting,
todos
her
que
axé,
participam
to all
deste
the
evento.
participants in this
Do Rio Grande do
important
Sul,
event.
Alex
From
Dias,
Rio
de
Grande do Sul,
Rondônia,
Alex Dias
salve
says,
ao povo do Nordeste, salve ao
greetings
povo
to
da
the people in
Bahia,
the
aos
northeast
irmãos
of
e
Brazil,
irmãs das
to the
religiões
people
de
in
matriz
Bahia,
africana.
to the
E também
sisters and
salve
brothers
ao
of
turismo e
African-derived
espírito
religions.
preconizado pela LBV na construção
One
de
of the
uma cultura
aspects
de paz.
defended by the Legion of Goodwill was the construction of a peace.
Letícia, e você
And I want to
pode
highlight,
trazer muitas
Leticia, we had
manifestações
so many
em relação
messages
à mensagem de paz
regarding the
trazida
message of
pelas
peace that was
crianças da
brought
Legião
by
da Boa
children
Vontade. Ana
of the
Luísa
Legion of
tem
Goodwill.
lembranças
Annalisa says,
maravilhosas, e por isso que
wonderful,
amo a
wonderful
LBV.
children,
A
that's
Gislaine
why I love
Canedo
the
também,
LGW.
dizendo que
Helena
fofura,
Caveiro said,
gente.
oh,
E
that's
a
so
Teresa Cristina,
cute. And
quanta
Teresa Cristina
sabedoria
said,
das
oh,
crianças.
so
Quero
many
aproveitar para
wise words from the
destacar
children, and we want to highlight that this work, the social and educational work that is carried out by the Legion of Goodwill, takes place because of the support that we have from the Goodwill friends. That's why the Legion of Goodwill has been working for more than 2 years for a better world and a happier humanity. And in social and educational activities, we apply the pedagogy of affection, the ecumenical citizen pedagogy that were devised by the educator Paiva Neto, and the results we see here, and this ecumenical embrace to everyone here. And I want to register another participation here in our chat. And she says, thank you once again. The interreligious dialogue has always been an aspect, and the Legion of Goodwill has always been a partner in contributing to the ecumenism cause. And this relationship, this friendship has been a long-standing one and will continue for all the dates. And for Mother Ângela, and for Mother de Gantois, now we're going to follow the words of the Professor Humberto Schubert Coelho, adjunct professor of the Department of Philosophy of the Federal University of Juiz de Fora, Brazil, and coordinator of History and Philosophy of the Research Center in Spirituality and Health, NUPES. He'll be talking to us today about the scientific and philosophical investigation of spiritual phenomena.
Saudações a todos.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Humberto Schubert Coelho, professor of modern philosophy at the University of Juiz de Fora. I'm very honored to be speaking here at the LGW Spirit and Science World Forum, and I'm going to be talking to you about the importance of academic scientific studies on spiritual experiences. All religious or spiritual traditions, even those that are not organized or institutionalized, they talk ostensibly about certain experiences. These experiences give meaning. They are ultimate experiences that have an existential, vital, psychological relevance in the lives of their practitioners or affiliates. These spiritual experiences seem to be very consistent across cultures. In other words, they sometimes are interpreted or even experienced in a very particular way. Let's say the Japanese or Yoruba cultures, or even in cultures that are dead, like the Celtic or Inca cultures, or the most diverse cultures from the most remote regions, from the farthest possible corners, even from islands, from the Easter Island, from Hawaii, the ancient Hawaiian culture, from the Samoan Islands, from isolated villages in Africa, in Australia, in Siberia. So the person who experiences anything from a state of bliss to a vision, from a mere intuition to a psychic or even physical healing experience, is going to undergo a type of trance. They're going to experience a type of physiological or behavioral phenomenon, at the very least, in which their spirit will seem to be totally absorbed. Their consciousness will seem to be totally absorbed in this experience. This is very interesting because although cultures sometimes don't communicate, as is the case of very isolated cultures that live in the middle of the desert or an island in Siberia, what's interesting is that the nature of the experience in its most straightforward aspects does not change. We're also going to talk about types of experience in a little while, and these types are also invariable, which is very interesting. But before we dive into them, we need to observe that there is a great deal of prejudice against cultural variations or alternations in the way these experiences take place. Today we have a very relativistic anthropological perspective, a dogmatic relativism that preemptively prohibits that experience from saying the opposite, from giving the idea of a universal phenomenon. Naturally, due to biology, there are phenomena that are totally invariable, that are going to occur or develop in a very consistent and invariable way, regardless of the culture. So, in the next step of our anthropological study, we need to reconcile anthropology, the study of cultures, with biology, with what natural science tells us about human nature in the strict sense of the word. Only in this reconciliation we will be able to envision a new anthropology, whether an anthropology of the natural man or a science-based anthropology based on what science can demonstrate. Today we have comprehensive data on spiritual experiences that arise from the medical sciences, for example, from the various fields of psychology, mental health studies, psychiatric research, and various epidemiological studies that correlate spiritual experiences and spiritual values with a series of extremely objective data about human life. Through this empirical and natural research, we can confidently assess the exact impact of spiritual experiences or spiritual beliefs of spirituality, as the medical science themselves like to classify this entire experiential field. The exact impact of spirituality, spiritual experiences on data, which are absolutely objective elements of human life, such as the likelihood of becoming physically or mentally ill, or the likelihood of becoming addicted to something. These experiences are not only consistent and invariable in a wide range of cultures, but what is most fascinating about the consistency of spiritual experiences is that the types of experience are also invariable. What are these types of spiritual experience? Anyone who knows even a little about religion in its formal sense has a faint notion that prayer, for example, or meditation for religious traditions that focus on meditation produces spiritual experiences, produces an altered state of mind, a type of experience that is not an ordinary experience. So people who pray frequently or people who meditate frequently, they invariably report that this simple gesture, which can sometimes be very fast and very accessible to practitioners of a particular religion, of a type of spiritual tradition, of a spiritual current, even if they're just beginners, they can feel or perceive that there's a change in their pattern of consciousness, a change in their mental and emotional patterns. These effects are usually accompanied by physiological effects too, a change in the heart rate or in the breathing pattern at the very least. These practices might have other long-term consequences. This is all thoroughly and intensely studied. Of course, some studies will reach different conclusions, but at least from a subjective point of view, people are able to realize that the very basic spiritual practices, such as a prayer or meditation, which are widely accessible, change the way in which the consciousness perceives reality, perceives itself, and so on. Sometimes it amplifies a feeling that is typically spiritual or religious, which is the feeling of being accompanied, the feeling of being in connection with the whole, in connection with nature, of not being separate or abandoned by the universe, by nature, by God, etc., or by spirituality. Sometimes great experts in spiritual experience, like Friedrich Heiler in his book, Das Gebet, the prayer, a great specialist in prayer, both as phenomenological element and as a process of consciousness, he will observe that even those characteristics we observe in other types of spiritual experiences, such as trance, meditation, focus, sometimes even shared attention, all these different types of experience are going to be present in prayer. Prayer can provide very similar effects or sensations to these other religious experiences. The same can happen too with meditation. Meditation can produce the same effects that prayer usually does, in addition to its rather typical effects. But what's more interesting to observe is that invariably these basic spiritual experiences, which are so accessible to every practitioner, produce sensations. They produce very specific sensations, such as feeling of security, for example, acceptance, comfort, and companionship, of being in a relationship or interrelationship with nature, with the cosmos, the cosmic order, the spiritual order, with God, entities, etc. In addition to this very basic level of practice, all religions also work with the idea of extraordinary feats or extraordinary episodes of consciousness and extraordinary spiritual experiences, such as in the case of like prophets, shamans, saints of our religions, Buddhas, those individuals who go beyond the ordinary experience of faith, belief, who transcend the ordinary to have a spiritual experience. We know, of course, that Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, Abraham, Moses, and even Plato and some philosophers had outstanding spiritual experiences. They had the extra and spiritual experience that produced a very strong impact on their consciousness and had such a great impact, a noticeable feat, that it attracted other people or provided other people with spiritual experiences too. So, an invariable element of human religiousness and human spirituality is that, in addition to those basic experiences that every practitioner or believer experiences, there are certain extraordinary experiences that belong to prophets, saints, or founders of a religion, the initiates, the shamans, whoever they are. This extraordinary phenomenon of conscience is not so extraordinary to the point of not taking place in every culture. It doesn't happen to everybody, but it happens often enough so that every culture has a spiritual teacher, a religious leader, a founder of a religion, a new prophet, an announcer, an enlightened one, no matter how each religious tradition describes and presents this phenomenon. So these two levels need to be recognized. All cultures also recognize the close relationship between spiritual experiences and healing, particularly healing mental disorders, mental problems, because spiritual experiences are known to generate well-being. This is not an expression of ideological or philosophical opinion, but is widely proven from the research of Alistair Hardy to the recent epidemiological work of Tyler Vanderweel from Harvard University. So just quoting Oxford and Harvard, the two biggest and most reputable universities in the world, two renowned researchers who have published in the top natural science journals in the world. It is very clear, therefore, that this is in a hermeneutic interpretation of human sciences, ideology, perspective, or philosophy. We do have a way of empirically checking if there is a strong correlation between spiritual experiences or religious spiritual experiences in the broad sense, and a sense of well-being, a sense of purpose in life, a sense that life is not in vain. Believers feel it. Anyone who has a spiritual experience, a spirituality, feels that their life is not in vain, that they're loved, that they're in harmony, or that they're in the flow of universal will, or what would be in the cosmic order, the moral and spiritual order.
This feeling promotes a strong psychological and mental health. People are better equipped to tackle life's highs and lows, to tackle that feeling of worthlessness, the feeling of meaninglessness, the feeling that life is vain and useless, that it's heading towards nothing, the terror of death, death as the destroyer of meaning, as an event that eliminates the beauty and value of life. These sensations are linked precisely to the absence of spirituality. It's not by chance that great materialistic and anti-religious philosophers reach nihilistic conclusions based on the idea that, in fact, life is devoid of value, is devoid of intrinsic purpose, and that purpose is invented by each one of us. So these great intellectuals like Nietzsche, for example, are well-known examples. And they will conclude correctly that nihilism is the correct interpretation of life in the face of its absolute meaninglessness. That it's possible, of course, to create or invent some kind of meaning and maintain life in a certain degree of reasonableness, a certain degree of suffering alleviation, of improved well-being. But this type of attitude is more palliative than intrinsic to human nature. So human beings are not in their rightful place in the cosmos. They are basically destined to disappear. Spiritual experiences, therefore, according to both nihilistic and materialist authors, as well as to the medical sciences, especially the latest ones, are going to help individuals prepare and sustain a philosophical concept of life, which gives and promotes meaning, purpose, well-being, comfort, and hope. Because the horizon of this experience of connection with the whole, of harmony, of being accompanied, the person can interpret life as being complete, welcoming, hopeful, as it is moving in some direction, as it has a meaning and an intrinsic reason, as if life was intelligently organized, as if life was clear to rational beings rather than obscure, fateful, and tragic. So this existential contrast between a meaningful life, a reasonable life, and a meaningless, obscure, tragic, unreasonable life that is actually moving irrationally. This fundamental contrast during the great irreligious or anti-religious 20th century produced a split, a rift, a break, a schism between the pessimistic and optimistic, or between nihilistic perspectives and spiritualistic perspectives. So I'd say that this is the biggest, most profound consequence of the spiritual experience. It has this unique capacity to convey meaning. This is another very interesting fact and consistent across cultures. It doesn't seem to depend in any way on a specific culture, on a specific tradition, but it's something that appears in all cultures, either somewhat invariably or completely invariably. The idea that spiritual experiences are not inventions or products of the human mind. This is exactly the anti-religious, materialistic understanding of the spiritual experience. This assumption runs counter to the feeling of anyone who has ever had a spiritual experience, which is the feeling in a way of receiving or sharing something with what is beyond, the reality beyond your own consciousness. So shamans, prophets, and great meditators have the feeling that they found something in the spiritual experience, that they've received something, that they've been called out to from beyond. They never have the feeling that their consciousness has produced the spiritual experience. So the assumption that the spiritual experience is a product of the mind, and that it only deceptively attributes this meaning to something external to itself, this assumption is basically a dogma of philosophical materialism by which different approaches try to discredit the spiritual experience without analyzing it, without even analyzing how it is constituted in its own phenomenality, in its own internal phenomenology. So the first thing we need to do, if we want to have a scientific view of the spiritual experiences of spirituality in general, is to start analyzing in a dispassionate, impartial, and critical way the spiritual experiences. Finally, if I can speak very briefly about two books that I published this year on this subject, The History of Religious Freedom addresses institutional mechanisms that suppress people's rights to communicate spiritual experiences, spiritual religious experiences, in the way they see them. So the history of religious freedom is a more philosophical history than a history about spiritual experiences. We consider how the concept of freedom was philosophically refined and expanded to encompass different interpretations of the scriptures, for example, of the Bible, of different spiritual experiences or ways of interpreting those spiritual experiences. Finally, two psychiatrist friends and I have also launched a book this year entitled Science of Life After Death. It's still in English, but we are trying to translate it into Portuguese. This book deals only with spiritual experiences and how these experiences are only suggestive of a spiritual reality beyond the physical life. Well, again, I hope this brief talk was thought-provoking and that we can arouse people's interest in carrying out research or perhaps encourage those who are already doing research to get in touch with us so we can put together a broader framework of attack, scrutiny, of systematic and scientific investigation into these aspects of human life, which is such a central aspect for people and much neglected from a scientific point of view. This is much discussed from a merely anthropological and cultural point of view in its popular meaning, from a religious and theological point of view, but scientific research, although it is happening in top scientific journals and university collections, the population is still not discussing these experiences. So we somehow need to better convey the scientific studies we have in this area. And now with us live to answer to all the questions that we have received so far, Professor Humberto Schubert Coelho, welcome, how are you? Hello everybody, good evening, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you. And we have so many messages congratulating you and saying that your explanation was very clear, and we're going to start with the questions. The first one is from Antonio. And he asks, I would like to know from the professor, what's the difference between praying and meditating? And if they are the same thing? And if praying and meditating are enough to reach spirituality? That's a very interesting question. Yes, our concepts of spirituality, they are still very general. They aim to broaden a field that is very vast of phenomena, of concepts, of experiences, of postures, existential postures, in a way that is very hard to summarize the concepts of spirituality in every practice or perspective, isolated. But we have to do something in contrast. We need a concept that is functional of a spirituality, but that is a flexible and open to multi-diversity of interpretations that people have according to their experiences, according to their spiritual experiences. In this context, prayer and meditation are important because these practices are very common, and we, with goodwill, can convert some practices of relaxing, of focus of attention, and introspection and reflection, and even silence and solitude. We can convert these practices into something, into a conception of meditation. If we do that, we can say, yes, that meditation is as a generalized and universal as prayer. Therefore, two ways, almost as fundamental to religiousness, the two are very important. And yes, you are very right. They are very similar. They are very similar to each other because these are ways of trying to connect to the divine, to something absolute, to the universe, to God, whatever your religious concept is, whatever, however you see and understand the source, the origin of the things, the order, the moral order, and natural order of the life.
Muito bem. Professor, inclusive,
All right,
temos
Professor,
aqui
we
uma
also
mensagem
have
do
a
professor
message
Humberto de
from
Rio Grande,
Genilson
do Acre. Ele
from
manifestou no
Acre
chat,
in Brazil.
disse
He
que
manifested
essa
himself
palestra
in the
traz
chat,
muitos
and he said your
esclarecimentos
talk
sobre
had
fenômenos
brought a lot of
espirituais no campo
clarification about the
científico e
spiritual phenomena
filosófico.
on the scientific
Parabeniza o
field.
fórum,
Congratulations
também
to
pela
the forum
explanação.
and also
E uma
to you
pergunta que
for the
também chegou
explanation.
até
And
nós
a question
é
that
por que é
has come
importante esse
through,
olhar para a
why is it
filosofia da
important to look at
ciência no
religion
intuito de se
and science
avançar
in
nas pesquisas
the
sobre
intuition
os
of advances
fenômenos
the research on
espirituais?
spiritual phenomena? Another interesting question. Many of the presumed conflicts between science and religion derive from a poor understanding of the knowledge and the philosophy of science. So, the better the understanding we have of science and religion, the better will be the integration between these two fields of life, these two dimensions of human experience. In the first place, the person that works with definition is the philosopher. It's not a scientist or a religious person. The religious person dedicates to specific cultures of communion, of worship, of rituals, practices that derive from these postures, and the scientist dedicates to the investigation of the facts and the laws that govern the natural world, the phenomenal world. So, these definitions, they lie on the philosophers. Unfortunately, however, the culture sometimes conditions the person and the ego of the person. They tend to act that way and put definition to so many things and talk about so many things and use the authority they have in a subject to deal about another specialty, which is wrong and illogical. So very often scientists or religious person, the clergyman, expresses their voice about a different field without the fundamental concept. So it's very important for us to know that we know how to separate what is religious experience, what is theology, the clergy, and what belongs to nature and that will be analyzed by scientists. And when we go beyond these fields, usually the individuals go into a realm that is not part of them, or they are not prepared to say affirmations about the subjects they are talking about. And this is one of the causes of the lack of understanding and the great misunderstanding, cultural misunderstandings between religious people and scientists, and between the same person that is religious and also has some notions of science, or is a technical person, or is a doctor, or is an engineer or a scientist, and that person leaves the conflict because she or he doesn't know how to coexist as religious and scientists experience as a technical person that believes in science. So for that, we need a social debate that is very vast, which is what you are doing very well. Professor Humberto, the next question is, science in general follows a materialistic vision of nature. Are there other perspectives that can favor the research in spiritual research experiences?
Well, in the first place, this affirmation is not completely true. We don't have a total consolidation of materialist philosophy among scientists. Unfortunately, we have a certain confusion that takes some people to believe that science is obliged to adopt the material philosophy, as in other eras there were the notion that science was obliged to adopt spiritualist philosophy. Dealing with some philosophy issues, we will understand exactly that materialism and spiritualism are metaphysical proposals that does not lead to the phenomenal world, but to the interpretation, philosophical interpretation of this phenomena and the total meaning, the sense of life, of reality. Well, when the scientist or the religious person pronounces about the materialism or spiritualism, they are philosophizing. Again, like in the previous questions, not always scientists or the clergy have philosophical training specific to talk competently about materialism or about spiritualism, while philosophical proposals as they are. So we need a scientific education to restrict itself or to re-educate itself to not talk about these questions, these philosophical questions. Now, in a practical sense, it's also important to observe that it's not totally true that science is materialistic. A great number of scientists, notably the most famous ones, notorious ones, the most important ones throughout history, a great number of philosophers were spiritualists. So they are the two options. They continue in the same path. Very well. Professor, we have another question from Daniel Silva. He firstly says, this is it's very well that you worry about the universal experience, the spiritual experiences, but how can we do without nullifying the particularities of the religions, without reducing them to their objective meanings, and without having a homogeneous vision about the religious diversity? Excellent. Well, from the point of view of a scientist and of the scholars, or even from philosophers that talk about religion, it's even more interesting for us to observe the universality that in all spiritual experiences are all similar, identical. From the point of view of the spiritual experience, however, it's interesting that the person to deepen this experience, to harvest the fruits of this experience, they must be involved in this symbolic universe of symbols and practices which are typical of their religious faith and belief. Basically, I would divide it like that. For the religious practitioner, it's good. For the researcher, not so good, not so interesting. Another interesting point that your question brings refers to the idea of the traditions and the religions. They can also present, and it seems they present, specific phenomena that deserve the research, the study, specialized research and study. Very well. Professor Humberto, we thank you, your participation tonight with this talk and now answering live the answers. We thank you in the name of the Legion of Goodwill and its president, José Neto, and we open space for your final considerations. Well, I thank you very much, because the idea of us reintegrating the conscious field, human field, reintegrating the most vital activities for our existence, like our spiritual life, religious life, and knowledge, the natural knowledge and scientific, this reintegration is absolutely fundamental for our conscious be not fragmented, separate, in conflict with each other, with ourselves. This has created several problems that we have identified that goes from intimate conflicts, from exploding the social conflicts that we are victims of and observe so many times nowadays. I praise your initiative and may you have strength to be repeated in other activities of dialogue among science and faith. In the name of the Legion of Goodwill, thank you once again to the professor, Dr. Humberto Schubert Coelho, adjunct professor of the Department of Philosophy of the Federal University of Juiz de Fora, Minas Gerais, Brazil, and coordinator of History and Philosophy of the Research Center in Spirituality and Health, NUPES, that was talking to us tonight and ending tonight's talks in the World Forum Spirit and Science 2022 edition. Now we will thank you and bring you the final highlights of these 2 evenings. José Bertolin is back with us. Many are clapping, thanking the first talk of Dr. Humberto once again. It was very well. And the Legion of Goodwill for promoting another edition of the World Forum Spirit and Science of the LGW. We would like to thank you once again, everyone who have been with us in the last 2 days of broadcast on YouTube. The work of the Spirit and Science World Forum of the LGW is permanent. You can still follow on our YouTube channel. And if you still haven't registered, register now in our channel and you receive weekly newsletters with content being produced constantly in the World Forum Spirit and Science of the LGW. At the website, you can subscribe to our newsletter and you can receive in your email all the highlights of the Spirit and Science World Forum of the LGWs. The website is spiritandscienceforum.org. Thank you to all our guests and speakers tonight, Bernie Lyment, João Carlos de Carvalho, Fátima Machado, who spoke yesterday. Today, Harold Koenig, Mother Ângela Maria Ferreira, KéKeré do Gantois, and Professor Dr. Humberto Schubert Coelho, wrapping up tonight, this evening of speeches. And in the name of the President of the Legion of Goodwill, we thank you, all of you, and extend this, Mr. Paiva Neto, thank you to all of you who have been following one more edition of the Spirit and Science World Forum here in its headquarters, the World Parliament of Ecumenical Fraternity, the Parlamundi of the LGW. And let's go now towards 2023 to the new highlights, the new additions that the forum provides, has been providing throughout all these decades, uniting science and faith on the path to equilibrium. We are looking at some pictures of the Temple of Goodwill, the Parlamundi of the LGW. And for you who would like to visit, we are here at 915 South in Brasilia. Thank you to you all who have been with us at the Spirit and Science World Forum 2022 edition. 2023, the activities have begun, and now we count on your participation, answering our survey, so we can build a better event, more rich, and even more plural than as this one. And it's built every week. The Spirit and Science World Forum on website on YouTube has weekly videos, weekly speeches. Thank you, all of you who, when registered, also brought your contribution, your financial contribution to the activities of the forum that are permanent. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, and while you access spiritandscienceforum.org website, you can register for the weekly newsletter and receive all the news until we reach at our meeting at 2023. We have received now, and we end right now with this gratitude note. They said from we thank you, the love and the care of the broadcast, congratulating all the staff. We have a very broad staff here in Brasilia, also in São Paulo, to bring to you in 4 languages this edition, the 2022 edition, as it happens in all our international events. They thank the Legion of Goodwill throughout Brazil, but specifically in the state of Bahia. And let's continue in this fight where faith is the great support, the great bond of our lives. Let's continue to have faith as the instrument to reach peace. And ending, we would like to dedicate all those of you present here with us today this reflection of Brother Paiva, the creator of the forum, the journalist Paiva. We must look for the future, working for peace in all fields of area, material and spiritual. This is our wish that we work for. That's what we work for every day. And that's why we end with lots of joy in our hearts, with this salute of peace and goodwill that brings us together, brings us closer to this great spirituality. God is present and Jesus lives in our hearts forever.